Let's do it. Stanley Cup Final, Vegas, Florida. What a surprising Stanley Cup Final. Nobody had Florida making it this far. I'm sure there are people who had Vegas making it to this point. I mean, they were the number one seed in the Western Conference after all. It seems like they were the most overlooked number one seed in like NHL history. Like this team had 111 points. They had star players out of the lineup all year. Mark Stone, all the injuries he had, Jack Eichel, Shea Theodore. Guys missed chunks of time. There was a carousel in the goaltender position. Like they went through like 5 goalies this year. Now they have Aiden Hill, who leads the playoffs in save percentage, and even better save percentage than Sergei Bobrovsky at this point. This team is now fully healthy, and they look like an absolute juggernaut. And then you have Florida, who just keeps winning 1-goal games. They're undefeated in overtime. Matthew Tkachuk keeps scoring big moment goals in the biggest games of the year. And Bobrovsky, according to MoneyPuck.com, leading the playoffs right now with 19.7 goals saved above expected.
Insanity.
So what are your initial thoughts on this Cup Final before we get into our predictions, which we'll do in a little bit?
It's fun. I mean, you've stories, which you're always hoping for is stories in a Stanley Cup Final. You have a goalie that's come out of absolutely nowhere and gone batshit crazy, looking like Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, Dominic Hasek, all rolled into one. And it's an 8 seed. So you can get on that train. And I'm sure a lot of people are just rooting for the 8 seed to win because it'll be cool. And some people just cheer for chaos. And then on the other side, you have Vegas, a team that hasn't been afraid to make major moves to piss people off. They're a new franchise. It was kind of funny with Vegas, and maybe it's tied into the whole culture of the city. I feel like everyone kind of liked Vegas right away. And, you see the kids around, Vegas jerseys, Vegas hats, even you'll meet random people. My favorite team is Vegas. When I say people, I mean kids. These kids, I mean, they were good right away and they just picked a new teams and they were winning. So why not? But for a team to win the Stanley Cup in their 6th season in the league, that'd be cool. So that's another story. You have a lot of players people like and dislike on Vegas, like Stone and Pietrangelo. Now, Edmonton, you listening? How you feel about that guy right about now? Hill's an amazing story too. Here's this team that was juggling goalies the last couple of years, and here's this kid playing amazing. So I'm looking forward to it. Am I looking forward to it more than any other Stanley Cup Final? I'd be lying if I said the markets aren't kind of boring me a little bit, and I don't really have a dog in the fight that I'm really rooting for, but it'll be good. I think it'll be a long, hard-fought series with a lot of turns, to be honest.
Looking at the current betting lines, the Vegas Golden Knights are a slight favorite to win the Cup. They're at -130, while the Florida Panthers are +110. And Lepore, me and you were kind of discussing this before we came on to record the podcast. Like, that's pretty absurd, honestly, that Vegas is only a -130 favorite right now, because it feels like Vegas has been the best team in the playoffs. I think if you asked any hockey fan who's been paying attention to the playoffs from game 1 of the first round until right now, I think they would all say that Vegas has been the better team, whereas Florida has made it to this point, winning a lot of 1-goal games, getting phenomenal goaltending, scoring timely goals. And listen, both teams are kind of benefiting from the same things. Like, to get to this point, you do need luck to go your way as well. Like, you have to win a lot of 1-goal games. You most of the times need a goalie to stand on his head, except last season when we saw Darcy Kemper win the Stanley Cup with like a 900 save percentage with Colorado. Yeah. But just looking at some of the stats, the Vegas Golden Knights have outscored their opponents by 25 goals at 5-on-5 in the playoffs. But one thing I do look at, Lepore, and I think this is why the betting lines are as close as they are, just looking at the lines to win the series. When you look at the expected goals, Vegas is only at a shade over 50% in expected goals for percentage, while the Panthers are at a shade over 46%. So according to the numbers, just in terms of like shot share and scoring chances and things like that throughout the playoffs, neither team has been that dominant. And again, I'm just looking at the stats And this doesn't tell the whole story, the expected goals, and call me a nerd and say none of this shit matters. I don't care what you say. But I think that's the reason why this series is priced as close as it is from a betting perspective.
Is that expected goals all situations or 5-on-5?
That's just at 5-on-5. If I sort for all situations.
Vegas is only at 50%.
Yeah.
That's shocking based on how many goals they've scored.
And then when you sort for all situations in the playoffs, Vegas sitting at under 48% with expected goals for percentage, and Florida under 46% in expected goals for percentage. So Vegas is 10th of the 16 teams, and Florida is 14th out of 16 teams.
Yeah, to be fair to Vegas, for the all situation stat, they had to face an Edmonton power play. But think of what you just said, Bruno. That was an absolute fucking protein shake for all the anti-advanced stats people saying, look who's in this Stanley Cup Finals, everyone. Two teams that are not necessarily dominating play, getting the shot share, like you said. Awesome, man. Bring on the comments, bring on the hate.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool to see. But what's weird is that like Vegas doesn't have great 5-on-5 numbers, but yet they've outscored their opponents 48-23 at 5-on-5 in the playoffs, which is absolutely absurd. So we'll see how this one plays out. Are you ready to give a prediction for the series?
Yes, I am ready for my prediction of the 2023 Stanley Cup Final. Anthony
Let's
Bruno.
hear it.
I think it is going to be a good one. I think you have an awesome clash of two teams, two different styles. I think you have two really good coaches. You have two goalies playing out of their minds. But I'm always going to go with talent. I'm always going to go with the team that's been more consistent over the course of long stretches of time. So I am going to say that in their 6th season in the National Hockey League, to make us all feel bad about ourselves and our favorite hockey teams, the Las Vegas Golden Knights are going to win the Stanley Cup in 6 games.
I love it. I love it. I'm pretty much on the same page as you, and I know there's some people yelling and saying, again, they agree on the same thing. But listen, Vegas is the better team across the board.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm not going to discount Florida because I think they low-key like have a lot of talent on that roster. And obviously that has been shining through over the last 6 to 8 weeks as they've made this playoff run. Like you go down the list of the Panthers, Barkov, Tkachuk, Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad, Bobrovsky, Sam Bennett, like Listerainen, who's like a really good depth player. He's still very early on in his career. Like they have some talent on that roster in Florida. I'm forgetting even Carter Verhaeghe, who scored 40 goals this year. But when I just look at the machine of the Vegas Golden Knights and how they have just mowed through teams in these playoffs, they beat the Winnipeg Jets in 5 games. And then Edmonton, who people were just penciling into the Stanley Cup Final. Lepore, right? How many people penciled in Boston versus Edmonton in the Cup Final? Like 90% of people filling out playoff brackets. Edmonton comes in with this power play operating at like 57%. And they were scoring at will on the power play, honestly, in the second round against Vegas. And it still wasn't enough. Vegas took them out in 6 games. And then they get through Dallas in the conference finals. I think Vegas is a better team. I think they have more talent, despite all the talent that I mentioned on the Panthers roster. Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Shea Theodore, Pietrangelo, Marchessault, William Karlsson, who's got like 10 goals in the playoffs. Yeah. Marchessault's been a point per game player. They got a lot, even like their bottom 6, like they have guys that are putting up points, and like it's like line after line after line. These guys are coming out and creating opportunities. Doesn't matter who's on the ice.
Bro, that fourth line they have is insane. Again, I mentioned watching teams or certain teams that make you feel bad about yourself. When you watch that fourth line and how much speed they have and the scoring chances they create, you're like that's like our second line, not our fourth line, but impressive. And I think it's one of those cases with Vegas too, where they're in the West, they play late at night. They're not a Canadian market. They're not one of the traditional markets. So you don't watch them as much as you maybe should. And it was kind of funny. And here I am. I'm going to pump my tires a little bit. I was saying all year that as far as the betting markets were going, Vegas was the pick to win the Stanley Cup, because all year they were top 5 in the standings and nobody was talking about them. So you got pretty good lines. I mean, like you said, Edmonton, and you understand it. You understand the hype because of the McDavid and Draisaitl factor. But I'm not going to go as far as to say that Vegas has been disrespected all year, but they're showing everybody who they are now, regardless how you felt about them going into the playoffs. They've been the best team, like slam dunk, no doubt about it. They've been the best team.
I think they were disrespected all year, to be honest with you, because again, even heading into the playoffs, they were the number 1 seed in the West, and it felt like no one was really picking them to make it deep. Like maybe people had them in the conference finals, but not a lot of people thought this team was going to get to the Cup final, let alone win the Stanley Cup. So I'm not going with Vegas in 6, Lepore, because I think this series is going to be even shorter than that. Ooh. I think Vegas is going to dispatch of the Florida Panthers in 5 games to win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. I think the Bobrovsky fairy tale is over. Like another thing, like this Panthers team has been sitting now for a long time.
Yeah,
they swept Carolina. They've been sitting. They haven't been playing, and sure, they've been on the ice and they've been practicing, but it's not the same, man. Like I don't know the exact amount of days since they swept Carolina, but it's been a hell of a long time. And I think that's going to play a little bit of a factor, that they're not going to be quite as sharp. And again, I don't put a lot of stock into that, but I think it will matter even to a small degree. And I just think they're going to run into a much better team that is deeper, that is faster. And I think really the only hope that the Panthers have in this series is Bobrovsky continuing his otherworldly play. And again, he's put up 19.7 goals saved above expected in 14 playoff games. That's insane. Yeah. Unless he continues to do that, I think this series is over in 5.
You got me excited there, Bruno, when you said Knights in. I thought you were going to say 4, man. I was getting ready for you to call a sweep in the Stanley Cup final.
Now.
Well, there was that stretch forever where how many years in a row was it a sweep in the Stanley Cup finals? I'll have to go back to find the exact number. But yeah, like who was it? Philly got swept.
Philly got swept by Detroit, I believe, right?
Yeah, Colorado swept Florida. It just kept going. It was like 3-4 years in a row. It was a sweep in the Stanley Cup final. But hopefully it's not a sweep. Hopefully we get some entertainment. We got hockey in June, so let's celebrate it.
Yeah, no, it should be a great Cup final. Like you said, a lot of storylines, a lot of like star players, even though it's not the greatest from like a market perspective. Just thinking about the biggest markets that could be in this series, but it's still this is not the worst Stanley Cup final. All right, it could have been a lot worse than Vegas versus Florida.